Hello, and welcome to Conquering Finale. My name is Jason Lafredo, and today we are back at it with managing the score manager. We're going to specifically look at defining new fretted instruments. And technically, it's called Fretboard Instrument Definition, and there's a reason for that. So we're going to go into the score manager, choose this guitar tab staff I have here, and over on notation style, choose settings. And we talked a little bit in the last video about all of the options that you have available for the tab staff itself. You can choose any of these preset instruments, but you can also edit this list of instruments by choosing the Edit Instruments, and we get this Fretboard Instrument Definition dialog box. Now, the interesting thing is that the definition of this fretted instrument has implications for the tab staff, but it also has implications for the fretboard diagram in the chord tool. So there's actually a second way to get to that exact same dialog box. If we go into the chord tool, the chord definition, and edit any one of these fretboard diagrams, we get the fretboard editor. And we have that same list of instruments to choose from for this particular fretboard. And we can choose to edit the instruments and get the same exact fretboard instrument definition dialog box. All right, so and whatever you change here will change in both places. It's the exact same dialog box, just two completely different paths to get there. Technically, they probably should call this the, fretboard and tablature instrument definition dialog box, but I guess they just went with fretboard instrument definition. It does have implications for both, though. All right. So let's just talk about this dialog box a little bit. So again, you have all of the available instruments to you that Finale gives you out of the box, but we can always create more by choosing new. We'll just start us a brand new fretted instrument. We can duplicate the one that we're looking at. We can delete any one that we don't need. And the Set as Default button, the standard guitar will always be the default out of the box, but if you, for whatever reason, in your file need to set a different standard fretted instrument, you can just set it as default. It doesn't really have that much impact because you can always go through and change it when you need to, but that's what that's there for. And then with every single instrument, you'll have different settings below this. So you have a different number of strings, different number of frets. So for example, if we go to that 7-string guitar, you'll see that the number of strings changes to 7. And those strings are represented down here with different pitches, which I'll show you how to change in a second. And the number of frets as well. So, certain instruments will have a different number of frets. Your mandolin has 20, your ukulele only has 19, etc. And so we can change that as we need to. I happen to know that there are certain guitars that will have more than 21 frets. So if you really want to be specific about it and give your guitar 24 frets, you can certainly do that. And this standard guitar will now be saved with 24 frets. But let's actually create a new instrument based on the standard guitar here. So what I'm going to do is duplicate this standard guitar, and it will give me a standard guitar copy. And what I'm going to do is call this guitar down 1/2 step. Okay. And it's going to be the same number of strings, the same number of frets, but what we're going to do is change the string pitches themselves, right? So you can see them represented down here where you see string and pitch. And, the way that this works is the 6th string is the lowest string on the instrument going upwards to number 1. And on the tab staff, the 6th string will be the bottom line on the fretboard diagram. The 6th string will be the leftmost line in the fretboard diagram. So that's how that works. And of course, we can change these pitches. So with this guitar being tuned down a 1/2 step, it's really just a question of subtracting 1 from each of these pitches. These are the MIDI pitch numbers. 60 would be middle C. So the 40 value here would be E, an octave and a 6th below middle C. So we could simply just change that to 39 to give us the E flat. We can change that to 44 to give us the A flat. And the other way to do this is to just select in the box and then choose the listen for string. In this case, string 4, because 4 is selected. And Finale will be listening, and whatever note you play on your MIDI keyboard is what it will put there. So in this case, on string 4, I'm going to play D flat, and you'll see that it will change it to 49. Do that, listen to string 3, play G flat. listen to string 2. I can play B flat. So there's sort of two ways to do this, or again, we can just kind of change the number manually to 63. So now we have the 6-string guitar tuned down a half step, right? And so we're pretty much done with this. I will get into this diatonic situation in a few minutes, and I'll tell you about the speedy clef in a second. But for now, we've got our guitar down a half step, right? Before I choose that, let me just show you what the tab looks like for a standard guitar here. Just zoom in a little bit. You can see this is a copy of this D major scale here, starting with 0, 2, 4, 0, 2, 0, 2, 3, etc., up the strings there. But what we're going to do is now we're going to go into this guitar tab staff and change that to that new guitar down half step setting, right? Click OK, and now you'll see that the fret numbers are different because, again, this tab staff is now tuned a half step lower. So in order to get the D, it's not an open string anymore. It's on the first fret. All right, so that's how that works. We've just created a brand new fretted instrument definition, guitar down a half step. A couple other things I want to show you in here. I missed this little play all button for you, but if you play that, or if you press that, it will play all the strings from bottom to top for you. Or if we go back to the standard guitar, you'll hear that in the regular tuning. So that's how that works. The interesting thing about this play all button, and I had to dig into this a little bit because I was confused at first, is that the instrument that Finale chooses to play back when you use the play all button is staff 1, which sort of doesn't make sense to me, but because I never understood, like I always understood that staffs, if they don't have a name, like let's say I'm going to delete this this name here, the staff will actually get a default staff number, and as you can see, it's in brackets here called staff 1, and every single one of these staffs underneath the name is a different staff number. And what I always understood is that it doesn't matter what staff number exists where. You can put them wherever you want. It doesn't matter. It has no bearing on anything, except for the fact that if you don't have a staff 1 for some reason, that play all button in the Fretboard Instrument Definition dialog box doesn't play anything. And it doesn't matter which one you're choosing here. It's always going to be playing back on that staff 1. So I've just chosen the banjo, and it's not playing the banjo instrument. It's playing the sounds from staff 1, which is just I don't understand that, but that's just sort of how it works. So I only mention this because if you try and hit that button and nothing happens, it's possible that you at some point deleted staff 1 and then started adding more instruments, which will, of course, create new instruments with staff numbers other than 1. So if for some reason you lose staff 1, you're going to lose that functionality. So just be aware of that. And there's a couple other things I wanted to talk about in the Fretboard Instrument Definition dialog box. Let's talk about the speedy clef button. So what is this? So for every instrument, you can set a clef for that instrument that you're defining here to use when you enter notes in speedy entry. So what this means is that on any tab staff, if you go into speedy entry and click in a measure, you're going to get a 5-line staff that will behave exactly like a normal notation. So from here, I can actually enter notes, and you can see that it looks like, I'm playing a D major chord there, and when you exit the frame, it will convert it to the tablature notation. But as soon as you go back into it, it looks like normal notation. So what's happening there is that Finale needs to know what clef you want to use when you go into the speedy entry frame, and that's what this button is for, the speedy clef. So it makes sense for standard guitar to have a treble clef as the option to go in there. But if you're choosing like a bass or something, 4-string bass, I'm assuming that the speedy clef here is set to the bass clef. So that's sort of what that's doing there. And then finally, let's talk about this diatonic situation. So I'm going to cancel out of here and go into the Dulcimer. So Diatonic frets. So certain instruments, the dulcimer included, their frets are not necessarily in half steps all the way up the fretboard. Dulcimers have the first fret is a whole step, the next fret is another whole step, and then the next fret is a half step, and that might change depending on the dulcimer. I am not a dulcimer expert, so I don't know for sure. But anyway, a diatonic fretboard would have different levels of half steps between each fret, or whole steps, or whatever the case may be. So you can define that with this diatonic option and the define button. So here I've got my dulcimer DAA tuning selected, and of course the strings and the situation with the frets, all of that is the same. It's just the fret spacing is different. So when we click define, we'll get this diatonic instrument definition dialog box, which is going to allow us to define the steps in the fretboard for this instrument. Now I love this little window here because for some reason on a Macintosh it's incomplete. For each fret, starting from the nut, enter the number of blank. It seems to be an error in the programming. This does not appear like this in Windows. In fact, the full text of this window is supposed to read, for each fret, starting from the nut, enter the number of half steps the fret spans. Separate numbers with commas. All right, so a little oddity about that little bug in the program. Only on Macintosh, though. And then you have this, for example, for dulcimer with 2 octaves fretboards, enter this string of numbers, right? And it's not quite what's here for this particular dulcimer, but it's close. You have 2 2 1 2 2 1 2 2 2 1 2 2 1 2. Right? So what this is saying is that from the nut, the first fret is 2 half steps, and then the next fret is another 2 half steps, and then 1 half step, and then 2 half steps, 2 half steps. So again, this is a diatonic fretted instrument. That's how you're defining this. And these numbers could be anything. They don't need to be 2 and 1. They could be 3, I think, or 4, depending on how the unique instrument that you're using is actually fretted. All right. And so what's interesting about this is that, so now that we have this diatonic fretboard situation set up, even if you go and copy and paste this figure, this D major scale, into the dulcimer tab, 0, what you'll see is that this top line is the D, right? So you're getting a 0, an open string. The E, which is a whole step above the D, is the first fret, right? So in a normal situation, like in the guitar, in a chromatic fretted instrument, you'd see the second fret, right? So 0 2, but in the dulcimer you see 0 1 because the first fret is actually a whole step, right? What's interesting is that if you try and write a note that doesn't exist on the instrument, like the D sharp would not exist on the dulcimer, or the dulcimer in this tuning anyway, and it will give you an orange note telling you that that note doesn't really exist. Please fix it because that's not possible. So that's the diatonic options for those fretted instruments. And let me just go back here and make sure I've covered everything in the edit instruments, and I believe I have. So once again, the Fretboard Instrument Definition dialog box has implications for both the tab staff and the fretboard diagrams, which I'll get into at some point when I get into the chord tool. I think that's it. So now you know how to create your own customized fretted instruments, and that's really all there is to it. So thanks for watching. I hope this has helped. Come back for more videos soon, and I will see you then.